Hello, everyone. Welcome to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host for today, Tabitha Moretto. Today, we have two guests joining us. They are Dr. Jonathan Ching and Lee'or Rutenberg. Dr. Ching is the Chief of Congenital Cardiac Surgery and co-director of the Heart Center and Samuel and Athea Stroom Indoor Chair in Pediatric Cardiovascular Surgery. Lee'or is the father of Sadie Rutenberg, who was born with heart problems and shares caregiving duties with his wife, Wendy. Today, we're going to talk about the FDA approving the world's smallest and only mechanical heart valve designed for newborns and infants with heart defects. They are here to share their thoughts and experiences with the world's smallest mechanical heart valve.
So I'm here to talk a little bit about the Abbott 15-millimeter mechanical valve. Its indications for the mitral valve, but of course it can be used in the aortic position also. And the valve was available to us previously on protocols, and so to have it available in the operating room took several days because you'd have to get it through the IRB and then request the valve, et cetera. And the FDA's approval of it a couple of weeks ago means that we can have it off the shelf, which is a big advance for us because this means, in particular for emergencies, we have it available right there. Obviously, we have it available for kids who on whom we intend to replace their valve, and so we can do that operation whenever is indicated as opposed to waiting. And then potentially as important is as a backup for kids who would be undergoing high-risk mitral valve repairs. And we're doing more and more of those repairs recently, meaning in the last, I'd say, 5 to 10 years, probably because we're operating on more and more kids with complex heart disease these days that we might not have even, or who we might not have even operated on maybe even 10 years ago. And so for those kids who are going to the OR for a high-risk mitral repair, you want to have some sort of backup. And so this valve affords us that opportunity. And before this, the only valves that we had were adult-sized valves, so you'd have to wait for the kids to get big enough, or their mitral annulus to get big enough to accept an adult-sized valve, and they're not small. So a 17 valve, you'd probably have to wait until a baby was close to toddler age to accept a 17 valve. And there are other options, but they're all kind of taking adult prostheses and taking a valve out of a conduit and all these things that are kind of off-label uses. And I don't think there's either broad adoption of those techniques or endorsement, to be honest. So it's a big advance to have the Abbott valve for all these reasons. And otherwise the kids, and you'll hear from Sadie's dad, but otherwise kids stay in the ICU for weeks and weeks and weeks waiting for their annulus, their mitral annulus, to get big enough for an adult-sized prosthesis. So having this available to us means we can operate more expeditiously and get the kids sort of back on the road to recovery.
I think for Sadie, we knew she had a heart defect before she was born, but we had no idea that it was going to take the kind of limping along in the ICU for that long in order for her just to get this repair. And she was born. We thought we were going to take her home and have our operation in a couple of years to fix her defect, and then we'd be a different story. And then when we found out that we had to have this Abbott valve, it was one of those things where you kind of just focus on, all right, what's the next stage to get her to the point where she can get that valve? And I think that's what it kind of is for most families, is you don't focus on the end, getting her to she's 12 or 13 or, however old, but you focus on what's the next step. How do we get her to, let's say it's 7 pounds, or how do we get her to 8 pounds? And that's the hard part is, there is no guideline. We're breaking into kind of, a territory where we make our best guess to see if we can get her, the things that are going to help her along.
Yeah, the ICU is an amazing place in that way. The sort of small incremental steps that you need to make. And there was a time when they changed where I used to work in New York. They revised the floor plan of the neonatal ICU, and the important difference to me was that they put windows in, giant windows. And I said to the parents, some of the importance of that is that you get to see the sun rise and set every day, and you get this sense of time actually progressing, because otherwise ICUs, you'd have no idea what's going on. And you get very focused on these things like, when is she going to get to be 8 pounds? But if you take a step back and you have this sort of 30,000-foot view, you can see that she's really making progress. She's an example, though, I will say, the progress thing. I use her story a lot to tell parents about the impact of having mitral valve competence. And I described Sadie as she was so uncomfortable when her valves leaked. I mean, she was just inconsolable so much of the time. And almost the minute she had a competent valve, it was like she was a completely different kid. It was like incredible.
Yeah, it was amazing. I mean, and we spent those 7 months just trying to keep her comfortable. I mean, There wasn't any, recipe for what would, one day one thing would work, the next day not necessarily so. And she was a moving target all the time. But the people at Children's in the cardiac ICU were amazing. I mean, they just, if something stopped working, they were on it in a flash, and we moved to something else. And those are the things that you don't necessarily have to worry about as a parent. All you have to worry about is just keeping her happy, and you say, hey, she's uncomfortable, and everybody jumps to it. It's amazing. You don't have service like that at the home, that's for sure.
Yeah. I definitely underestimate. I mean, we do the operations, and we have the extraordinary satisfaction of watching kids get better, but I underestimate the day-to-day. And so oftentimes what I do is I'll tell parents, and you guys have been very kind to sort of say, you should just talk parent to parent, like hear it from somebody who was really managing anticoagulation in an infant and a toddler. Like, what is it like to have to go to preschool, like we were talking about? And that's very important.
Yeah, and I think as we move into more the internet age, and the ability for people to reach out on Facebook and support groups like Men of Little Hearts and Jamie's Foundation, these are all programs where I don't know that necessarily we would have reached out in that fashion, 10, 15 years ago. We would just kind of, work to ourselves, in the small groups that are in Seattle or locally, not necessarily in the national level like we are now. So,
yeah, and I think as we get to understand things like what's anticoagulation like in an infant, as more and more kids get this, we'll have a much better idea of the boundaries and what's appropriate and what's not. We may look back on this time as the time of a real frame shift for our field in that way, because just having a pediatric valve that's available like that is really important. There's obviously tons of questions I'm sure people will have about this. The best place, obviously, is abbott.com or these other family support groups that can help, I think, patients and families understand the valve itself and its indications for use.
And that was Dr. Jonathan Ching and Lee'or Rutenberg. If you like this interview, transcripts and archives are available at www.hpr.fm. We're on all social media platforms, so don't forget to follow, like, and subscribe. Show us some love by subscribing to our HPR YouTube channel. We're also available for download on SoundCloud and iTunes. I'm Tabitha Moretto, and you're listening to Health Professional Radio.